Little bit of time to start. Okay, so now we are into the feedback session of 6331. A few opening statements. Number one, I had all the papers. Number two, I got to read all of them and to review and give detailed comments to all of them. And I'm very proud of myself for that. Number three is I had an immense pleasure at reading all of these papers because they are all good. And they all demonstrate the students' willingness to engage into what I am asking, meaning really questioning our relationship with art, with the goal of understanding better what art is in reality. Number four, a very good exercise for the students as if they did not have enough would be to look at the summaries, and every time they see a paper that addressed the same work of art as the one that they have studied, please go ahead and read this paper because it's very interesting and educational. I learned a lot and I understood a lot of things by reading two papers on the same work of art. It was a really interesting experience. So I would definitely encourage anyone to do that. So go and browse through the summaries, and that's also a very good use of the summaries to find papers addressing the same topic that the ones that you've been studying. Another thing I need to say, it's about my comments. And some of you have taken my comments for what they are not. So for example, when in the email accompanying your reviewed paper, sometimes I have said your paper is okay, and then outline some remarks and stuff like that. When I'm saying your paper is okay, that really means just what it is. Your paper is okay, meaning everything, it has all of the required components. So there's no hidden meaning into this. So please do not over-interpret what I'm saying. And the comments, I need to say that they are all meant to guide you as much as possible into questioning in a very truthful manner our relationship to art. Most of the time, my main critique to a paper, if it can be a critique, is that you're making too much use of concepts and ideas, and that you're relying too much on these artificial constructions of concepts and ideas that do not come directly from your own experience to write your paper. I think that you need to reverse, for some of you, that process of writing and put that back onto its foundations, which are what is going on when you're watching the given work of art. And from that you will collect these theoretical concepts and references and shape your paper. But please do not do the opposite by starting from preconceived ideas and concepts and then going down to the work of art. So for example, looking at Flavin as a minimalist artist and saying, oh, minimalists were doing this and that, and then who cares about that? Art historians do care about that, but it's not a class in art history. It's a class called Aesthetics of Interactive Arts, and the goal of the class is to understand better our relationships with art,
Mm-hmm.
and not to elaborate on the artistic movements of the 20th, 21st century and things like this. It's not our goal in here. And the goal is really try to look for the truth. I really want that, and I think it's difficult. So for example, someone told me, well, that arts communicate, and so, I know someone, because last semester we had a long discussion about the question of art communicating or not. And then so maybe when someone feels that a work of art is communicating something to him or to her, that person will have to define what it is, that communication. I don't want to be left with just a word that doesn't mean anything. Communication, everything is communication.
Mm-hmm.
Even airplanes are means of communication. So what does that mean when someone says that work of art communicates this and this? What exactly is happening?
Mm-hmm.
And how is art actually communicating?
Mm-hmm.
Is art saying something?
Mm-hmm.
No. So what's going on? So why is it called communication? So that's all of my remarks most of the time go into this direction. What is this exactly that you're saying? Because I'm just in a very ambitious manner, I'm looking for the truth. I must say that's the thing, the truth of each individual relationship with each and as many as possible works of art. So, that being said, hello.
So can you rephrase again, please?
We started a little bit early, but please
Sorry.
come in. So I just gave general statements about the papers and everything, and how people should not take my comments badly on their paper and feel offended, and if they do, they're welcome to come and discuss this with me in person.
That's actually, can you just say it again? Comments are meant
to lead you towards a truthful exploration of your relationship with a given work of art. And really, I want exploration of your relationship with the work of art. I really would like everyone to do the effort of removing, putting aside as many as possible of preconceived ideas about what art is, what a work of art should do and should be doing, should it mean, and stuff like that. And to be left only with, okay, what's going on when I'm looking at this? And then you bring in your information about what you know about the work of art. Because I'm not saying that this is a completely naive experience. It's also an informed experience. And you're looking at that diagonal by Flavin, and yes, you know that it's been done in the 60s, and you know that it refers to the work of Mondrian, and you know who Mondrian is, and all of that. But that should not precede your and pre-form and pre-inform your exploration and your experience. So you experience, and then you put that in the perspective of what you know, and you wonder how that works. I think that's and I know it's difficult, because I'm trying to do it all the time. When I'm looking at works of art, I'm going to a gallery, and I go out and I
do?
And
That's
I
a
say,
question I have. How do you do as a professor in art and stuff? How do you do to get rid of your knowledge and your knowledge and previous experience of art world to came as a naked person?
well,
How
and so you're right to ask this question because that's not exactly what I'm asking.
Okay.
I do not want you to become that naked person in front of the work of art. Of
Mhm.
course, you bring always your knowledge, your background, your subjectivity,
Okay.
but you need to remain this person and to keep that knowledge. But then, when you consider the experience of the work of art,
Mhm.
you need to allow this experience to emerge outside these preconceived ideas and frames and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And of course, you will always say, okay, oh, this painting, it reminds me of Francis Bacon and stuff like that, and it will bring you elements of comparison between the two. That will always happen, but you need always to redirect your exploration towards, okay, what exactly is going on. So, for example, if it reminds you of Francis Bacon,
Mhm.
what precisely in the painting is doing this?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Is it the way the face is represented and slightly distorted?
Mhm.
So every time there's a concept, an idea, something that you know in advance
Mhm.
that is coming into your way, question it. And question it not in general terms, but question it in very precise, accurate terms that directly relate to the work of art itself.
Mhm.
So always bring things back at the intersection of who you are and what the object is. And do not let you be carried over by
Mhm.
purely intellectual explorations.
Mhm.
Always go back to the work of art, to the object that's in front of you. And that's what I'm doing when I go to a gallery and I'm trying to understand, okay, I do not like that exhibition. There's
Mhm.
nothing that moves me. So I'm always here standing and say, okay, what's going on?
Mhm.
And you're here, you say, okay, so it's basically a reference to minimalism, but what doesn't work? And then you look at the details of the work of art and you understand what works and what doesn't work.
Mhm.
And then you elaborate on that to form your opinion, and then that's it.
Mhm.
But it's really that constant effort to going back
Going back.
to the object. And there's, it's too bad that Alex is not here, but I think he should be.
Should come later.
It should come, yeah. Well, because it's just 3.
Yeah.
In his paper, he quotes Heidegger,
Mhm.
and he said what we need to be looking for is the truth happening in the work,
Mhm.
not the truth that is in the work,
The truth that is manifesting.
the truth that is happening in, which is very interesting. That idea of the truth is not a predetermined thing,
Mhm.
but that is something that is emerging
Mhm.
in the work. Okay, and he say what we need to do is to be standing within the openness of beings with an S that happens in the work. And we could spend the rest of the day to dissect this quote. And here's come Alex, who will be doing it for me. Hello.
Hello.
We started in advance, so you're not late, and I was just because you allowed me to do so, to quote your paper and to say how well it was written. And I was extracting the quote that you make from Heidegger in this, and I was saying that is exactly what I'm asking to everyone, standing within the openness of beings that happens in the work, to find the truth happening in the work.
So.
And I was thinking maybe if everyone is interested in that, maybe we need to go into that sentence
Mm-hmm.
and really perform a detailed hermeneutical inquiry about that sentence, about these 12 or so words. Because it's very important, that's exactly what I want to do, is coming to a state, to an informed state of a viewer in front of a work of art as it is described in here.
So, just kind of more a structured question.
Uh-huh.
So you would prefer us to start with the experience, maybe just say what the work is, and then just dive right into, and then link that into other
Mm.
background information?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And you need to be the one who is leading from your experience that convergence of theoretical concepts.
So if we come up with a claim or something like that, that from
Uh-huh.
from the experience of the art, I mean, we can
Exactly.
pretty much follow that throughout the paper.
Exactly. So what you need to do, and being very concrete, is you do all of that rich experience of the work of art, and you come to a conclusion, and that's where you start writing your paper. It's from this conclusion, and then your paper will start here and show us the way to here. Okay? But that's yeah, very simply this, very simply, yes and no. Because I don't think it's something usual that's being asked in academia to go into that process, but to me it's the equivalent of a scientific inquiry, except that the science is the object of this science is yourself, your own consciousness, and the only way to address it is by using your consciousness. There's no book to explain to Bruce who Bruce is. Okay, and there's no book to explain Frank who Frank is. There's only Frank living and being conscious of his experience of living that can lead me to this. Okay, so there's no theory of the mind that stands valid for everyone. No? Is there one?
Not valid for everyone.
I don't
Maybe,
think so.
I don't know. Not
I-
valid for me.
So and maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's a little bit awkward in an academic setting that you would be asked to go into that kind of inquiry, and maybe that surprises some of you that you would be asked to be looking for the truth of their relationship with art and saying, okay, what do I learn with this? Tend to say you will learn a little bit about what art is, which is already a whole lot. So, Alex, do you want to go into explaining a little bit that quote by Heidegger, and I repeat it
Sure.
again? And Nick, that's almost what I was saying earlier this morning. What what is required for you is to be standing within the openness of beings that happens in the work of art.
Okay.
Basically, and this morning I was trying to explain something maybe a little bit more simple about what I think characterizes a work of art. It's a state of incompleteness. It's the state of an incomplete relationship between something that is and something that I interpret. So it's a state of incompleteness between what we call in phenomenology between noesis and noema. And it's a state of struggling incompleteness between these two that is manifested in a work of art. And that incompleteness is really an openness. Okay? If it was complete, there would be a perfect perfect merging between these two things, the noesis and the noema, or we could simplify by saying the what? Suddenly I've lost my thoughts. Between the signifier and the signified, very simply. Okay, and when the signifier and the signified really strictly coincide, there's no openness anymore. There's no interpretation. There's no possible new meanings emerging from that system. It's a closed system, and it's perfectly looping onto itself. It's not, definitely not an artistic situation. So for example, in words, if we stay with words, when I say stop, I mean stop. Okay? And that's it. That's a perfect system of communication. There's no openness. I'm not saying stop, but you may keep moving on. I'm saying just stop. Okay? So that's a typical example of a non-artistic object. Okay? But when I say, as in the poem by Stephen Wallace, it was evening or afternoon. It was snowing and it was going to snow. A blackbird sat on a cedar limb. So you see that if I look at what I have a very limited set of words, and if I really crudely translate that into images, but then I cannot. It's not done, and you realize that you're looking at that poem and looking at that openness of the beings in these lines.
The openness of the broken language almost.
Well, no, because it's a structured language, but there's a brokenness, or an openness or a struggle between in the system of
Different
relationships
tenses.
between the signifier and the signified. And that's what makes it a beautiful poem and a work of art. That openness of beings that happen in the work. Okay, and the typical example of that is the metaphor also, or the metonym, meaning that you signify more with less words, or you signify something else. The signified is displaced from the signifier. And that's what's going on, I think, in art, what I call that openness. But I will let Alex express himself.
No, there's following that thought of phenomenology that I've been pretty acquainted with for years now, that everything is about existence. That's why the word stand out is so used, because existence means to stand out from the Greek. And that's how messages, meanings have to come from the chaos of being with capital B. And in art, the beings, the small b, are all the elements that the art has, both physical, conceptual, metaphorical, and everything that can, and in that, from that chaos that is contained, in quotation marks, one can experience and let it unfold. You kind of have different readings. I have a different reading. You have a different reading. We experience like also from the Greek that it's about going through that unfolding of the meaning, and depending on where we stand, it's a different one. It's never complete. It's never done. It's never finite.
But how, with while having different experience, how do you think that the work of art always convey the same truth? How do you reconcile the absolutely of the truth and the variety of the experience?
I think I don't agree with the notion of a single unique truth. In a way, for me, the one unique truth are the many truths contained in a work, be that art, literature. there's also the factual, that it's a different discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But my perspective, my experience, my truth, plus your truth, plus the other truth, plus this infinitesimal
Mm-hmm.
summation of all the truths
Mm-hmm.
approaches us to the ultimate truth, but we cannot grasp it. That's another thing in phenomenology that we can never quite grasp. We can never go and touch the horizon or touch the rainbow,
Yeah.
because
The
it's
Holy
already
Grail
gone.
is not attainable.
Yeah, but that's true that you can never perform a perfect synthesis of the multiple experiences of the truth happening in the work. But still, you feel the possibility of its existence. And that's to me what I think is fascinating in the work of art, and that's what, when we talked about the historical dimension of the work of art,
Mm-hmm.
saying that we always feel an historical dimension to a work of art, meaning that we always feel that our experience of the truth happening in the work is extending previous experiences of that same truth happening in the work of art. But we experience that this truth is in the process of changing constantly, but remaining the same. And to me, that's also the fascination that we have with ancient works of art, because we feel for such a long time the permanence and the permanently changing aspect of that truth when we consider that work of art. And that's why we feel something exceptional, which is very different from what we experience in everyday's life. And that's why we love art. It's because it places us into that phenomenal duration of human consciousness. Suddenly we feel connected and deeply connected with an entire civilization, because we can see the movement of the truth through the experience of the work of art.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
To deviate from the discussion now, but in that regard, I still have a lot. I mean, I had a comment for you, but let's move on. Because I wanted to understand better how you this idea of the truth that is happening in the work. How did you frame it in your own paper? But I think I have to read your paper. But the idea is, we were talking about the digital artwork and the fact that, for example, you had some artwork that has been produced in the 80s that are no longer working today because the software and basically the medium has evolved and it doesn't. So, in the context of digital art, do you think that they convey or they bear the same truth? If this truth is no longer reactivated, I mean, is no longer possible to reactivate it.
And that's right. So, yeah, basically the idea, and we were exploring that in the Labsent, because digital poetry was very active in the 90s. And people doing this were using systems and software that do not exist anymore today. So basically their works is gone forever. So we only have second-hand experience of these works.
Yeah.
So the question is the truth that was manifested at the time where they were still possibly working, is it gone? No, it's enriched, and it enriched their temporality. It enriched the fact that they were artistic expressions deeply connected with the state, a certain state of technology at a certain time. And to me, it adds to their truth. And it makes it even more meaningful. So it does not destroy it, it just extends it in another direction, which is the direction of their rich connection to the nowness. That becomes a past.
Sounds like it's going back to his definition of that there is no one single truth, but multiple. As it grows, you're basically growing that one truth or idea of truth that is a combination of multiple truths.
Yeah, yeah, it's really
Go ahead.
No, and in that case, I would even suggest that the truth that was inherent to those pieces that are lost in history or time, the truth was not lost with them entirely because they influenced other pieces of art, and they became part of the river of history towards our now. Going to another phenomenology part of it with the Heraclitus and the river, that you never watch in the same water twice in the river because it's always flowing, and that's the same for art history in general. It's unfolding, and we are experiencing the remnants of yesterday and propelling ourselves to stand out in the future of those. And speaking in art terms, the digital poetry of the 90s will affect somehow and contain part of the truth of it in the digital poetry of today, because someone experimented back in the 90s, others saw that allegedly, and they created their own poetry according to the technology of the times, and that came to another generation and now to today. So it's this.
I think I agree
constant-
with you, but my question would be, is because we had a discussion about that, this thing that Heidegger came about, he basically moved the aesthetics question from the question of beauty, and he displaced it displaced the main paradigm of aesthetics from beauty to truth, right? And so I'm wondering if it's still valid today, given the fact that our technologies are obsolete. So because when you talk about the different experience that we can have, we can have the different experience by going to, let's say, Mexico, and makes the experience of the old pyramids and the all ancient work that have been done 2,000 years ago. But I cannot do that with some pieces that have been done in the 90s because they're not operating anymore. So
No.
how can we have the same shared experience of a truthness if actually the object has disappeared?
I have a
And in that case, is still the truth a valid paradigm as framed by Heidegger?
I have a part of an answer for this. Part of the answer is called index and indexical relationship and traces. So when you go and see the pyramids, you do not see the pyramids. You see what's left of them.
Of course.
And same thing with digital poetry from the 90s. Even now, you're just seeing what's left of them, the traces, the indexes of this, and the authenticity has transferred from the object itself as it was to its indexical representation to what's left. And also what's also very interesting is that gives us also a very interesting dimension, which is the dimension of the criteria for selection of what's left.
Okay.
And that also is very important because you see suddenly that the work of art is also informing us directly about the criteria for selection in our collective memory. And that definitely adds a big dimension to the work of art and to its truth, which is its capacity at witnessing directly as an index the actual meaning of a civilization in general. So that's part of my answer to this question.
And just out of curiosity, what work were you referencing, particularly when you're sort of discussing this? How can we see it if it doesn't exist? Whereas when you're talking about the pyramids, you can see something. It's transmitted to you optically. So, are you talking about a specific work in general that's just written in its sort of document the way that's been documented, like in history? In many instances, you may not be able to see any of the stuff, so to speak, that it's referencing. So, how would you be able to write a sort of this synthesis based upon your own personal experience? So, I'm just
So
sort of curious to
I
know.
was referencing to some of the artwork that we've seen in this lab called Absent, the digital poetry session that we have on Wednesday from noon to 2 p.m. And there we've been talking about the earliest digital poetry that have been done before the internet. So in France we have, for example, something called the Minitel,
Okay.
which was the pre-internet how to say modem for French people. It was a little box with a keyboard, but it didn't have all those. So, for example, in the case of some websites which are not, whose URLs are not active anymore, so you have a bunch of those, right? So the fact that you cannot access anymore this platform because the link is broken, for example. So it's the way I understand Dr. Defoe's answers is that the index in this case would be the 404 page, right? And so yeah, I'm talking about this kind of artwork which are no longer existent. You also have some poetry made on CD-ROMs, and you need a specific, I forget the name, director.
Software,
so
or they do not work anymore on certain operating systems, and QuickTime plugins are not existing anymore, and
Most laptops don't even have CD
Yeah.
drives.
yeah,
You have to spend extra money, or
Yeah.
it's something people don't even think of. Really, it's just stream.
So what we have from these works of art from that time, and I could take very simple example of my work published in 1996, an interactive novel, multimedia interactive novel published on CD-ROM in France. Today, if you try to open it on any computer, it doesn't work. So I had to go back to the source code and to recode everything so that someone could see it. But I had the chance, and I was lucky to have the source. But for many other works, you do not have the source. It's locked into a program, and you cannot access it anymore. And what you have is you have images, you have fragments, you have papers written on that. But I think that all of these objects belong to the multiplicity of and the openness of beings that happen in the work.
Okay.
It's just
I think it
It's-
argues for an author's kind of backup strategy too. I mean, I've lost stuff that I did, and I could talk about it, but you're not going to see it. That computer's gone. It's gone. If I would have thought ahead and still had it, I mean,
well, yeah, and
it
that's
wouldn't
true.
just be an index.
And you're pointing to something very important, is the awareness of the technology that the artist has to have.
Yeah.
You cannot just be a naive, or can you be a naive digital artist
And you'll lose stuff.
and produce things that will disappear just by themselves? That's another question.
But the key thing I think I remember from this is that if I understand well, Heidegger may have opened. What I remain is the possibility of disappearance. That is, that is at the center of that. Because actually, now that I'm reflecting upon this discussion, I also connect it with all those art pieces that have been produced centuries ago that we never experienced, but we know that they have existed.
Yeah.
Also performance art that are just ephemeral,
Yes,
and you have nothing else than language and testimonies to address those. So Yeah, talking about this openness and let's say
Closure.
closure of the artwork, it allows more space to consider the disappearance and the manifestation of the artwork. But I would just wonder if the paradigm of truth is still operating with the digital media.
I would argue that in Heidegger's framework, it would be working, um, but mostly because, from his perspective of ethics and authorship and authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
the making and the intention
Mm-hmm.
are what belies in the artwork. The artwork itself is a representation that represents, makes present again that intention and that, um, and everything that was the essence of the artwork, the making and the intention behind it of the creator.
Mm-hmm.
So the artwork itself can be gone, but it existed, and it affected, it unfolded and participated in the universe, and with that, that was the extent of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
What do you so?
well, no, you seem to be worried about the question of the truth, or something that, and in the sense of Heidegger, it's absolutely not something absolute
Mm-hmm.
that pre-exists the work of art. It's something that happens within the work of art.
Okay.
It's not predefined, and it's always something that is about to fail. That's what I think makes also a work of art so powerful when you're watching it, is that you really feel that it's is happening, but it also has the potential to fail. There's always that very fragile balance between the appearance of this phenomenon
Mm-hmm.
and the impossibility of its appearance. There's always something threatening that keeps this emergence of the truth to unfold peacefully. There's, you always experience in a work of art something that is contradicting that beautiful flow of the revelation of the truth. It's rare that it's free of any constraint, and it's always revealing at the same time the possibility of its own failure. And I think that's also what's happening in works of art, revealing the multiple possibilities of its failure, as at the same time that it reveals the potential of its success. So if we take the and even very simple technical failure.
Mm-hmm.
What if the power doesn't go on when I start the thing? What if there's a bug in my program that makes it so that after 2 cycles it just goes out and I have to restart the computer?
Mm-hmm.
What if on my beautiful painting from the 17th century there's at certain time of the day the sunlight is completely masking everything and I just see a big white spot?
Mm-hmm.
There's always that technical failure that is here, and it's one of them, one of the possible multiple failures of the work of art, something that will interrupt the flow of the experience, which makes work of art highly fugacious in that dimension of the experience. And that's why that number one theme in the book by Schenken is really important, because he starts by setting the stage for everything else, meaning trying to understand that immensely temporal dimension of the work of art. And he uses this in chapter 1 for a reason. It's really to lead us on into this direction of the non-certainty, absence of strict determinism,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. It's really some kind of initiation. You need to be initiated to that aspect of the work of art before going into the rest of the book. It's not a book like a book in aesthetics, where you are initiated to historical processes and learning that this school of painting happens before this one and is influenced by this and this factor. It's different here. It's not a knowledge that we're going after, it's the understanding of our own experiences. I think that Edward Schenken, in this book, I think he does a great job at doing this. No? You want for us to go into, I have details about the papers and the works of art that we have been looking at, and if you have questions. There's one thing that is important, and I said this to several of you. Maybe it's a good idea to pursue the same question from one paper to another one. Someone was after the question of spirituality in art, and he explored it through the analysis of his experience with the Turrell piece in a very interesting way. And I said, okay, well, go for it, and have that structuring your entire semester. And I think that's a very good idea. Your idea about emotion, I think it's something that can really support your entire semester. If you're interested in understanding how you experience emotion in front of a work of art, go for it and spend the whole semester studying this. Because it's time that people engaged in video game and animation as you are really put their finger onto that question of emotion. What's going on when there's an emotion in a video game?
Yeah.
Where does that come from? And how does that work? That's, to me, a very good question. So go for it. And that's a good one. There was also a question about interpretation and questions about, okay, how much am I allowed to interpret a work of art by saying that work of art means this and that and reminds me of this and that. So what should be framing that interpretation? Is it a free-flowing interpretation where you can actually go anywhere and say, well, no, I'm not seeing that, I'm seeing a penguin, and I want to talk about global warming and how penguins are sad and blah blah blah. Okay, is anything possible when talking about a work of art in terms of interpretation? I think that's an important question, and how to help you framing that interpretation so that it remains to something that's valid. Number one, I think that when you know that you are interpreting too much, when what you're saying cannot be reconnected with the reality of the work of art in a very simple way. So when you're talking about the size, and I had that in 2 papers about the weather project by Olafur Eliasson. Where's duration in that? That's a very big question, and so the student interpreted something that was not in the work to talk about duration. You need to go just into the work and look at what's going on. So you have that gigantic space and stuff like that. So if you say that there's duration in this, you need to show where it is. And you need not to immediately jump to infinity and cosmos and stuff like that. You need to go into the work and say, okay, there's probably duration because there is a very large space. How am I informed about the size of the space when it's hazy and all of that? Because there's mirrors on the ceiling, and I can see how much the size of my image is smaller than what I am. So by this I can really understand the size of the space. And by understanding the size of the space, then I can understand what it takes to go through that space, which is duration, which is time, the time it takes for my image to travel up to the ceiling and to go back to me. I have that sense of duration because I am using space to elaborate on this. So that's number one thing about interpretation. It has to always go back to tangible, objectively describable aspects of the work of art. To me, an interpretation that is not valid is just purely based on rhetoric, saying, oh, this piece is environmental because it talks about the weather, and suddenly you're in a chain of words that have relationship between each others but do not have any relationship with the work of art. So you need to be really cautious when you're using textual analogies to connect concepts. Every time you're doing that to move from one idea to another, it's a nice rhetoric form, but it's not a valid investigation of your experience. Using words just to perform connections. Okay.
So, like going back to what we talked about earlier. So, your final interpretation is not something that you necessarily want to keep out, but you want to make sure that we follow through those very literal aspects of the art of how that we reach that interpretation, our personal interpretation.
Yes.
Because that very literal sense and aspects of the art and how it relates, or how we're perceiving that, is our experience with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. That's what I want to read is, okay, how do you come to realize that openness of beings within the work of
A
art?
more logical stream of interpretation.
Sorry?
Is a more you're wanting a more logical stream of interpretation,
Not logical.
or not? Maybe I don't know.
Grounded in evidence.
Yeah,
Yeah,
evidence.
more grounded.
Yeah.
A more
'Cause
grounded.
rhetoric, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. And for example, using historical references to move forward into understanding your experience, I do not think it's very useful. Except when one of the concepts that you borrow from that historical reference is used to support something that really existed within your experience of the work of art. So I'm thinking about the Flavin diagonal. And it's okay to talk about space when talking about minimalism. Only if you show me that in this piece there's something problematic with the relationship to space that you experience while watching it. But it's not okay just to say, well, minimalism was usually dealing with and space, and you start talking about space and stuff like that, and because you said space, now you can talk about relationship. that doesn't mean anything. Okay, what means something is, yes, it refers to the movement of minimalism, and yes, I can very well see that that perfect 45 angle that it forms and the way it casts a shadow on the floor really reveals something about the space to which I would not pay attention if the piece was not placed purposefully here with that color and all of that. And then seeing that, you can move on and talk about the space. Someone did a very interesting remark about how to introduce the question of duration in Turrell's piece, The Red Corner. Very simply he said, well, you can see little particles of dust floating in the ray of light. And that suddenly attracts you to, okay, it's not just an object, it's something in the space that's moving, and it's light. And then from that you can talk about the experience of duration and introduce your idea of spirituality. Okay, I'm invited into contemplating time and stuff like that because I saw that something was moving in the air. And that to me is really, that is what I call a grounded report, something that is a valid interpretation. But the validity can be your subjective interpretation. That guy saw the dust, someone else did not see it. Okay, so you see that it's subjective, but it's valid. Because it exists.
You have another thing about interpretation?
No, I think that's it. Unless you still have question, and if it's still unclear, what I say, what I call excessive or excess of interpretation. In fact, excess of not grounded in the reality of the experience of the work of art interpretation.
So if
go ahead.
If that, okay, I had these two questions for the previous discussion. So would you have a terminology, maybe a classification of the beings that are happening in the artwork?
You're asking for a classification?
Not a classification, that's a bad word. A terminology maybe might be better. Or how is there a way to identify the different beings? Like it could be
Well,
language, testimonies, I don't know. Or how?
well, so for example, the multiple beings within of that openness of the work. Very simply, you have a first layer of these beings of the work of art. It's a title. Okay, a work of art has a title, or maybe it's untitled, but it has something that is a title. That's one of the beings. And then it's a neon light. That's another being of this. And then the other being, it's in this gallery. And all of that, and the other ones then come as you look at it more and more, and you can actually talk about the cord that connects it to an electrical outlet and stuff like that. So all the beings are the multiple fragmented things that compose the work of art, and the multiplicity of all of these. And some of the beings are readings that you have made about this work of art, and historical references, and your own experience of a colored neon light. So all of that is part of the, that openness of beings, and the idea that all of that is chaotic, okay, but structured by that tension between the noesis and the noema. It's structured by that conflictual relationship between the signifier and the signified. And that's exactly what are these beings.
So I think my question was more in the context of our discussion about the artwork that are not existing anymore, that do not exist, are not there.
So
Like
yeah,
a performance
yeah,
that is ephemeral.
yeah.
What is the being of a performance which is no longer here?
Well, what's
How does it?
there's plenty of them. There's documentation, photographies, recordings, reviews, papers written on this. The actors are still alive. All of that.
Okay.
But now, it's not that the work of art does not exist. It does not exist as a vessel anymore to contain these beings. And the beings are just now exploding out into the universe.
Okay.
They are not framed by that tension of the work of art,
Okay.
because the thing is gone itself.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, someone wrote in a paper something. I said I need to write that down because it's beautiful. And he said that, and it was about spirituality. Knowing and its objects are one, and that's a very interesting sentence about a work of art. When knowing and the objects, its object, the object of knowing, they're just one, which is a typical definition of spirituality. And I think it describes in part very well the artistic experience. You do not feel detached from the work of art, and you do not feel the detachment between the object and what it means for you and stuff like that. You feel that there's something that exists as a whole, and that's what makes all the artistic experience to be engaging, I think.
It's like the interaction between is what causes it to be a whole, or is that a result of it being a whole?
Well, I think that it's that these two things forming a whole is the result of the interaction,
Okay.
of the rich interaction. It's not something that pre-exists.
Yeah.
It's something that is happening, that is made by, and that's, in fact, that's what we should call the poetic aspect of the work of art, because it makes actually something happen, which is that whole where the knowing and its object become apparently one. It creates something. Yeah, work of art creates something. It's not just, and that is an interesting idea that I've seen in some papers about kinetic art and about the what was the first cyber kinetic work of art?
Cyberspatio-dynamic, CSY.
Yeah, exactly. That one. And that's very interesting and very important, because that says that thing is that a work of art is not just a creation, it's something that is creating. And that piece really reveals that very important idea that a work of art creates something. It's not just something that is, it's something that actually does something. So that's what we could call the poeticity of the work of art itself, which means that the work of art is not poetic, but is making things, is doing something. Yeah, CYSP. Yeah.
Kind of like how the game Flower has no narrative, but yet you feel like you're going along a path, like how narrative, has narrativity. It's just like,
Yeah.
but really, it's just about an experience, really.
Exactly. And that whole idea that I would say almost originates here, while it originates before, especially again coming back to Duchamp, that the work of art is not just a creation, it's something that creates. It's really what supports everything that we're doing here in ATEC and dealing with interactive art. So how can a game be a work of art? Well, yes, because if we start accepting the idea that a work of art is actually creating something, you can accept that this could be co-created also by the viewer, and so something interactive can become a work of art.
For example, the game Flower.
Yeah.
It creates a very strong interaction as you play through the game because the environments that you're going through change.
Yeah.
And it's that dialogue between what you are viewing and what you are experiencing in the level and how that changes throughout the game. That experience is the interaction between you and the player. I don't know if anybody else has played that game.
Not long enough.
Have you played through the whole thing?
Not the whole thing.
I suggest.
Okay.
Because it is definitely one of those things where you don't get the true experience until you actually get to the final level of it.
Definitely.
So, but that's because the way that game interacts with you is as it changes. It's all about the change.
It generates its kind of different
And that's how
environment as you
that's
go
how it
through.
creates its interaction is by you experiencing that change throughout the game.
Wow, time flies.
Yeah. So you're having fun.
Huh?
Time flies when you're having fun.
Right.
Does it? I don't know.
It does for me.
Yeah. No, so as a not permanent conclusion, just temporary conclusion, number one, first set of papers was okay, meaning it was good, and it contained really multiple interesting things to be further discussed. I think that's very important. And I think that's very important that we all start understanding exactly what we're trying to achieve in the class, which is going into that really in-depth and difficult inquiry about ourselves in front of the work of art. And then when you start putting that into a relationship with the historical dimension of the work of art, I think that you will learn a lot more than if you had gone to a traditional class of aesthetics and historical study of art. Because all of these movements, new concepts emerging, you will have to have related them to your own experience. And I think that you will have a much more precise memory of this, which is a memory that allows connection and not something that is just connected by chronological references, but by strong concepts. That's my take on that. But
It's like the idea that the best way to learn something is to teach it. It's like you're teaching yourself how to interpret art.
you're exactly right. That's exactly true. That's my ambition, is that you become your own teacher about works of art. That's exactly right. Yeah, that you become your own, the expert of your own artistic experiences. Yeah. And then when you will bring that back into your professional existence, I think it would be really great. I hope. If not, I would not be doing it.
What you said about art creating is really making me think about generative art.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, just like, well, that definitely creates. I mean, it's art that's created that like creates within itself almost sometimes.
But you see that generative art can exist not only as a consequence of the technological possibilities supporting it, but also of the conceptual openness that allows us to say art is generating something.
Definitely.
And there's definitely an interesting relationship between the technological possibility and the conceptual one.
Yeah, because is it really generating something, or are there just voltages going through your computer and your speakers or whatever? And but it sounds generative, you know, or it looks generative.
So. Okay.